Hello, I'm EnterElysium and welcome to How to Play Gloomhaven, a tutorial. Gloomhaven is a tactical RPG now available on Steam in early access. There'll be a link down below in the description if you wish to check it out. And it's based on the board game of the same name, the board game being incredibly highly rated. This is a sponsored video. It's sponsored by Asmodee/Gloomhaven, so just bear in mind there'll be some sort of bias here, but we're sticking with tutorial, so you should probably be totally okay. Now, diving immediately in, currently available, as I'm recording this in the early access, is the adventure mode. There will be a couple of other modes, but the adventure mode is your roguelike type campaign. As we dive in here, you'll notice that you can choose a few different heroes. You can choose between 2, 3, or 4 heroes in the final version. Currently, however, we only have the 2 hero option available, and we're going to pick this group of heroes here with Cragheart and Spellweaver. Now, please bear in mind right now that Spellweaver is a bit more of a complicated character. I'll be picking her here just for the demonstration purposes, but if you're going to start a new game, I do suggest you leave Spellweaver till a little bit later on because she touches on slightly more complicated mechanics. You gotta pick a difficulty mode now when you load in. You get to choose between normal, hard, and insane. Insane is the same difficulty as the board game, and I definitely don't recommend it the first time around. It is punishingly difficult. Probably want to start off, as you might have guessed, on normal for your first few attempts. Your goal in adventure mode is to kill 3 bosses, gain rewards, and become a powerful mercenary. To do that, you travel around a map between locations. You can see here highlighted we have the city we start in, and we have 3 routes leading away. These are green, yellow, and red, which correspond to the difficulty, of green being the easiest and red being the most difficult. These take us to other locations, and from there we can make our way to the Bandit Commander. It might be advisable if you're starting off especially to take a somewhat circuitous route there, so you can try and get as much experience and gold as possible along the way rather than heading directly to the boss. Each of these paths rewards you in gold and experience for defeating the enemies along the way. Each path is normally made up of approximately 2 to 3 scenarios, which are individual levels that you'll need to complete. Each scenario or level is a dungeon at the moment, although there will be more available after early access, that consists of multiple rooms, loot, chests, and enemies. You'll actually be able to see the enemies you'll be facing once you select it on the campaign map. This allows you to pick your items and your cards specifically to combat that. Now, once you start off, you really only have the basic stuff, but as you go along, you will level up and gain more cards that you can change out for cards in your deck, or items that you can equip to your heroes based on the threat. There's only 1 goal in each scenario at the moment, which is to kill all enemies, but there will be more coming later. If you fail a level, you'll get kicked back to the previous town you're in, without actually gaining any experience or gold for it. The number of scenarios on a particular route combined with the difficulty determine the amount of experience and gold you'll get for completing it. As you travel between locations, you'll get a chance to spend your gold in shops at these locations. Centralized towns tend to have more shops, whereas remote outliers tend to have more chance of wandering merchant, who'll be selling more esoteric gear. While moving between towns and scenarios, sometimes you will encounter a text event. These encounters allow you to interact with the world around you and have effects on your party depending on what you pick. Sometimes the nicest possible kindest option isn't necessarily the best option for your group, so bear that in mind. When you get to a scenario, the game then transitions into the board game hex grid based level. Now, before we get started in the level, you're actually able to deploy your characters. You'll notice a number of white squares, including the squares that your characters currently start on. These are the squares that you can choose to deploy your heroes on. To move them around is pretty simple. Whichever hero you have selected, click on one of the white squares, and it'll move your hero to it. If you wish to move the other hero, click on them, or click on them at the top in the bar, or possibly on the left-hand side using the little circular icon at the top. Move your heroes around, and when you're ready, this will take you into the normal turn-based section of the game. There are 4 phases to a turn. Starting off, we have your card selection and your long and short rest selection. In this phase, you choose your 2 cards that are going to represent your character's actions in the round. Your character's actions consist of the top half of one card and the bottom half of the other. You don't pick which half of the card you'll be using until your turn, but at this point in time, you do pick which 2 cards you are going to use. You'll also be picking their initiative score, which is how fast they will act in the turn. Each card has a number in the center, and this determines how fast you'll be acting and in which order people's turns will be taking place. If you wish to switch the initiative value you're using between the 2 cards, simply click on the number in the left-hand bar rather than the card itself, and that will toggle your initiative between whichever card you are using. Now, do the same for your other hero by clicking them either at the top, on the actual battle board itself, or using the circular icons to the left. Once you've selected their cards, you'll then be able to just sit back and enjoy the enemy's card selection, which, this being a digital game rather than a board game, is actually pretty quick. Each enemy has their own little deck of cards from which they pick one, and they go through every action on the card. Unlike you who pick two, they have a much simpler turn, and their initiative value is simply the initiative on their card. When you're ready to go ahead with the actual turn itself, click the next button down below, and you'll be taken into the turn order phase, which is the third phase. During this, every character acts in their initiative order. If an enemy gets a lower initiative than you, they'll be going first, otherwise your first character will be up, and you'll be able to pick the cards to use. This brings us to the action phase. In the action phase of each of your characters, you'll be able to pick the two main actions they will be able to perform. These are the abilities from your card, one top and one bottom. You can use it from either card, but you'll only ever be able to pick one top action and one bottom action. You wouldn't be able to combine two tops or two bottoms. You'll also be able to use item cards at this point. These item cards you may have bought or may come intrinsically on the character will be on the left, as you can see a number of different items on the left-hand side. When you look at them, you'll be able to interact with the cards and play them at the appropriate time. Bear in mind that some item cards need to be played during an attack, and some item cards can be played at any point during your turn. That depends on the item card itself. I recommend you read them for each character, and they'll tell you on the card. Now, instead of using the top text or the bottom text on the card, you might choose that in some situations you might want to default on the action. There are a couple of action defaults. Instead of picking the top action on a card, you can always pick this option here. This is just to attack. So instead of having to do something like attack 3 with a move, or instead of doing something like a heal, you might want to just go with attack 2. Bear in mind that it doesn't say anything other than attack 2, which means that you can attack to anyone right next to you. You won't be able to attack at range, you won't be able to move with that. Similarly for the bottom action, instead of just using the bottom action, which might involve something more complicated, you can instead always opt to do to move. Not attack, not heal, not jump over an object using a move, but a simple to move. These can actually be very useful, and I will probably recommend that you always take them into account, because being able to default on an action is always a nice option, especially if the scenario has changed from what you thought due to the monsters already having had their goes. When using a move action, keep a lookout for words such as jump, which allow you to actually bypass intervening terrain. And bear in mind that typically when moving, you cannot move through enemy units. You can move through your own heroes, as they will move aside to let you get through, but enemies typically aren't that accommodating. The same goes for enemies. They're allowed to move through other enemies, but they can't move through your characters. When attacking, there's also a few keywords you want to look out for. Ranged allows you to attack at range. A range 2 would allow you to attack 2 tiles away, whereas attack without a range will mean the enemy has to be right next to you. When you make an attack, not damage strictly, anything that says do so much damage on a card doesn't have this effect, but when you make an attack, you will actually draw an attack modifier card as well. Each character has an attack modifier deck of cards. These involve several different options. You can draw a nil, a none, which effectively says you do 0 damage, regardless of how many damage your card initially says when you take the action. You could draw a -2, which reduces your damage by 2, -1, 0, +1, +2, and ×2, which allow you to do a lot more damage. Now, this is a deck of cards, and once you pull a card from it, it is discarded, which means that if you draw that +2, there's only one of those in the deck. You won't be able to draw that again. However, when you draw the do no damage or do double damage cards, you do reshuffle the deck. So bear in mind that as you go through it, it will typically skew the deck towards the other end of the spectrum in terms of damage. If you get really lucky and draw a lot of +1, +2s, you're typically going to do less damage next time you strike on average. However, when you do draw the ×2 and ×0, you do reshuffle the deck, and the probability gets reset. Also when you attack, and also when you do some actions, you will see a little icon on the card. This icon looks like an element. These elements allow you to infuse the map with mana for this turn and the next. Now, this won't take effect for the character's round, but the next turn, which could be your other character, it will take effect for. This effect allows you to empower certain spells. For instance, if you infuse the battlefield with fire, you can then use a card that has a fire icon with a down symbol next to it, which basically means that you are going to decrease the fire mana in the area to empower your spell. If you actually want to do this, it's as simple as clicking on the card to use your action, then clicking on the little elemental icon to kind of signal, yes, I would like to drain the fire in the area, and that will then have the key text added to it. In this case, we get the wound modifier. Wound is a status effect. If you actually want to check what a status effect does, you can simply go to How to Play using Escape, and having a look there will provide you a lot of information about the rules, and specifically an entire section on status modifiers. These elemental effects will stick around for the turn you cast them on, the next turn as well. When they're down to half strength, they will still apply, but it's just warning you that that is running out. And then the turn after, they will be gone. So use them while you can. You'll sometimes encounter actions that allow you to drain different types of mana. This is represented by a split color wheel. These ones just simply allow you to pick any of the types of mana represented on the wheel and will empower the spell. Now, one thing to bear in mind when you move around the map is that if you move next to someone, or if you start next to someone and use a ranged attack, you will be at disadvantage. What disadvantage means is that you draw 2 of those attack modifier cards and you pick the worst one. For instance, if you attack someone next to you with a ranged character, you would then draw a +1 and then a ×0. You would use the ×0 in the attack. You would do no damage, and of course, your attack modifier deck would be reshuffled because it's a ×0. Once you've played both a top action and a bottom action, you can end your turn, and it will go on to the next creature's turn. Once you've finished the turn, you will then be able to click End Turn and be able to go through to the next turn. This continues as normal with your card selection / long and short rest, enemy card selection, and then the turn order with your action phase in it. This continues until you've won the objective represented in the top right. As you go through a dungeon, you'll also notice around you on the ground, especially from dropped enemies, small piles of gold. You can pick this up by ending your turn moving over them. If you have finished your turn on top of a pile of gold, you will pick it up, or by using the loot text on a card. Loot is normally followed by a number, and this number determines how many tiles away it will pick up. If you have loot 1, it will pick up everything on every tile next to you, loot 2 up to 2 tiles away, and so on. This will also allow you to open chests. Chests are normally found on the ground and can be opened in a similar manner to picking up gold. It's definitely recommended that you open chests because they typically have a lot of gold or very nice magical items in them and are worth opening. Just worth noting is, if you finish a scenario in Gloomhaven and you haven't picked up a lot of the things that have dropped on the ground, you don't get them. You do have to pick them up during the game, and that's part of your card economy. Do you spend the extra time to pick up the gold, or do you rush to just try and finish the objective? So, if you can, try and pick up the gold as you carry along, because you won't be picking that back up later. If you're done with a particular room in Gloomhaven, you can move on to the next room in that scenario. To do that, look for a door that's around somewhere. When you actually move to the tile that door is in, the door will be opened, enemies beyond it will be activated, and then they will take turns after your current hero. If they have a later initiative, they'll be in the normal initiative order, but if they have an earlier initiative than your hero, they will act all at once, playing catch-up, because those enemies have been waiting there and they've known that you're coming, so they do get to have their goes all at once. It's advisable normally to open doors with a low initiative hero, so you don't get to act all at once without having to do any response. In terms of your actions, there are a few more complicating factors. For instance, many cards have this symbol on them. This symbol means the card is burned. Typically, when you use a card, you discard it. Next turn, when you get to pick your cards, you won't have the option to pick the cards you used last turn. They will have been discarded. In this case, however, this means the card is burned. Burning a card means that it is not discarded, it is effectively double discarded and put off to the side. You can't use that card again, you also can't discard it and get it back from the discard pile. Be careful when using these cards, because when you run out of cards and they are mostly discarded, you get to take the long or short rest actions. These are taken at the top of your turn during card selection. This is very, very useful if you need to get a card back, or specifically if you've run out of cards and need cards to play. The long rest action effectively replaces your turn. You'll notice it is represented here by a card with no top or bottom and the initiative of 99. It means you'll be acting last in the turn, however it does allow a few things. A long rest allows you to heal 2 damage, and then it allows you to burn one of your discarded cards in exchange for getting all your other discarded cards back. Long rests also regenerate your items. Items typically get tapped when used and can't be used again until you long rest. A long rest will reset those and allow you to use them again. Conversely, a short rest doesn't heal you, doesn't regenerate your items, but it also doesn't take up your turn, allowing you to use it and then pick 2 cards to carry on. A short rest picks at random one of your discarded cards to burn. If it picks an item that you really don't want discarded, you do get the option to redraw, but it does cause 1 damage to you. You will take a point of health damage in exchange for being able to redraw that card. Short rests are somewhat more risky because you can't be sure what card you're going to have discarded, but they do allow you to continue with your turn as normal instead of taking up valuable time, which the long rest does. There are 2 ways of being defeated in a scenario in Gloomhaven. Firstly, of course, you can run out of life points. If you run out of life points, the character is out. And of course, you can exhaust by running out of cards. If your cards are all discarded, you can still long rest or short rest to regenerate them, but if you run out of discarded cards because you've burned them all, either by using them as burn cards or having burned them for other long or short rests, your character will be exhausted and unable to carry on. Once all your characters are exhausted or killed, you'll be kicked back to the previous town on the campaign map and forced to start again. One slight difference with burn cards, however, is Spellweaver, who I mentioned earlier and thus told you not to pick because she's slightly more complicated. I will mention her now, however, in that she has a very specific card. You notice that we have here Reviving Ether. Reading through the text, it allows you to recover all your burned cards. She allows you to recover all the burned cards and get them back to your hand. In exchange, Reviving Ether is chucked away. And I use the term chucked away because you don't burn it, it is gone. Reviving Ether is very particular in this regard. It does allow you to get back those burned cards. So with Spellweaver, you can be a little bit more cavalier about using burned cards, but you have to bear in mind never to lose Reviving Ether. Spellweaver is somewhat more difficult to get used to because of her entirely different playstyle in this regard, and I wouldn't recommend her as a first-time character. When you finish a scenario, all your cards are returned, all your items are refreshed, and you get to go on to the next scenario with all your health topped up again. And once you make it to the location you were going for, congratulations! You've made it through 1 path. If you're lucky, you might be able to buy some new items here with your hard-earned gold, and these items will then be able to better equip your mercenaries. Also, after completing a path, all your items without infinite durability, which is typically all your items that you get outside of character selection, will have their durability reduced by 1. They are limited use. Now, you've got to pick the next path to go on, and onwards until you can defeat all 3 bosses and then complete the roguelike mode. It's going to be tough, especially if you picked a harder difficulty setting. Good luck, and welcome to Gloomhaven.